Hey everybody, welcome back to the High Performance Zone. Today I have retired Navy SEAL Stephen Drum. He goes by Drummy. But let me tell you, Stephen's a 27-year veteran, retired Navy Master Chief. So these are the guys that are leading the troops. They're in charge of the tactics. And we have a really incredible discussion here about comparing some of the Navy SEALs with the Blue Angels, of course, and really more about high performers. And there's a couple of key elements as we talk about the mental toughness, the mental agility, and how that training now is becoming more standard in these elite teams. And when we were there, it wasn't necessarily taught, but you learned it. So now you go back and you understand the why as compared to just how to do it. It makes a big difference. In fact, we talk a little bit about Stoicism. He also was one of the three creators of the Warrior Toughness program that the Navy is rolling out to normal sailors, not necessarily SEALs or Blue Angels. And it had three people. It was really kind of cool. He was there, the Navy SEAL. They also had a chaplain and they had a psychologist. And you think to yourself, well, wait a minute, why? That's a kind of unique group to come up with a warrior program, toughness program. Well, it's because it's the mind, body, soul. Okay. So, the psychologists talk about the mind, the body, obviously Navy SEAL, and then you've got the soul part from the chaplain. So we go into a lot of cool stories. You're going to love this. It also applies in every elements of our lives. So, and by the way, Stephen's got his new book coming out, and you definitely want to check on that. Life on the X. All right. And the X's means that's the center point. Where are we going? Okay, enjoy it with Gucci and Stephen. Stick around to the end. There's some really cool stories that we get into. Ready? Hit it. Everybody, I got a fellow naval warrior. In fact, a Navy SEAL, Stephen Drum, but he goes by Drummy. And Drummy, first off, welcome to the High Performance Zone.
Hey, thanks so much, Gucci. Glad to be here.
Yeah, nice. I love that. Glad to be here. Was that, now that you brought it up, was that a saying that you heard before when you were on the SEALs, or did you just realize that from the shirt and the content I'm putting out?
No, yeah. I mean, I think that's part of your branding. It's very intentional. It's very effective. And I think it sets a really good tone. And, if I'm being honest, we would probably use that in like a kind of a tongue in cheek way, right? After something really unpleasant, just glad to be here. Right. It's always that we really embrace kind of that gallows humor in the SEAL teams.
Yeah, I love that. I want to unpack your career, but there's such a similarity, I think, and some differences too, between the SEALs and the Blue Angels. And we're going to have some fun kind of unpacking that. One of the things it meant on the Blues, initially the glad to be here was you're just glad you were selected, right? I mean, we understand the challenge of even getting to become a Navy SEAL, but then once you are a SEAL, what does it take, right? So from that standpoint, glad to be here started there. There were those days you're just glad to be alive, but honestly, those were few. It was more about what you're saying, camaraderie, teamwork, be part of something special. And did you guys have a saying that at the end of your debriefs you would use, or was it more informal?
Yeah, I would say it's more informal. I mean, every excuse to bring up some smart ass comment is going to be given and taken, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, and a lot of it's the culture of the individual trooper platoon you're with.
Okay.
Right. And, and sometimes it's like, I remember one, it just sticks out to me. One platoon was like, you got to keep your shit right and tight. Right. That was the standard, right? Right and tight, meaning you're always prepared. You're always squared away. You're always ready to execute.
Yep. No, I got you. What, that's a pretty, that's an intense culture, right? That's that operational excellence one. Give me one. Was there other cultures that were looser?
Yeah, I mean, they all kind of take on their own personalities, but really it's ultimately about like, hey, it's a peer pressure environment because, as much as we like to say we're all professionals, I mean, you're always locked on, sometimes it's like the discipline is kind of underpinned by what you're worried about your reputation is going to be, should you not be all in on the particular task or operation or mission. So I think that's a lot of it. But I think, nothing really stands out in terms of intensity. They're all kind of very similar, and there was the pre 9/11 platoons where you're just like, hey, we don't have anything specific. We hope we're going to go on downrange on deployment and do something real world, but we may not. But regardless, we have standards. And that's the one thing that I know that would be the same as is in naval aviation, especially the Blue Angels, is there are clear standards, right? And that you're always going to be, you always know where you're standing and right, and where you're going to fall short or where you're going to meet the mark. And so I think that's the huge part of the culture in every unit I was with.
I'm with you 100%. And those standards of excellence really raise when you're talking about SEALs and Blue Angels, it takes a whole new level. In the Navy, there's standards. In naval aviation, there's standards. But when you get into the Blues, they're raised, right? And I can only assume that's the same in the SEALs. Is that true?
100%, right? And I think there's a level of, especially after you've been around for a while, right? Yeah. As you become more seasoned and more highly trained, there is a certain level of professionalism that's just expected of you. It's like the whole big boy rules, right? Yeah, you're it's not like you're a private in the Marine Corps where everybody's inspecting whether you effectively cleaned your battle rifle. It's like, no, it's expected that all your gear is taken care of. When you're a new guy, there's a level of intrusive management in terms of your gear and how you dial things in. But then as you get more experience, like a lot of those kind of reins come off a little bit. And it's more like, hey, you're expected to do these basic things, right? You're expected to keep a dive log. You're expected to clean your gear, your personal gear, your weapons, all that kind of stuff. So I think there's more responsibility that's just assumed that you're going to take on.
Yeah. I like what you're talking about. I define that as personal responsibility vice accountability, right? So when you're young, there's accountability and the organization has that, the team has it. But when you get to that level you're talking about, it's just a given, and you take personal responsibility, which to me then is what becomes is an ownership mentality, right? We all own the outcome, not just our role. Was that articulated like you feel like with that?
No, 100%. But it's also, again, it's back to that reputation thing, right? Yeah. As you get more experienced and more seasoned, right, it's expected that you don't have to be, you're held accountable, you're managed according to your experience and your reputation in many cases. But because if you've been around the block and you're at a certain level, you make a mistake one too many times or the wrong mistake, you may not survive that. Your reputation may not survive that. And so, there's a lot of constant on top of the new guys and, a lot of just riding them really hard. But it's like, if you're experienced, like it's almost, especially when I remember for me, it's like I'd go away and do an instructor tour, maybe 2, and I'd come back. And now I have to run and gun in the kill house with the guys. And I've kind of been out of the game for a little bit. Right. And man, I really have to really focus very intensely to make sure to mentally rehearse what happens. I go through a door, he goes left, I go right, open door, hallway, closed doors left, open door right, hallways in a T. I'm mentally rehearsing all those things because I cannot afford to be making mistakes at that level because I'll lose all credibility from the people that I lead. I love
what you're talking about. Let's talk about how your reputation's built and then in the SEALs, right? And I love what you just said about, we'll get back to the visualization process, right? But how is a reputation built on the teams?
It starts from day one. It starts in your training class, BUDS. It's, if people don't have heard of it, it stands for Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. It's a initial 6 months assessment and selection process to be a SEAL. After you complete that initial piece, then you move on to SEAL qualification training. And then before you actually make it onto the team. So it starts almost from day one. Yeah. And the one thing that I think, and everybody makes mistakes and you aren't expected to know everything, right? And you're not always expected to be the best runner, the best swimmer, the best, like you don't have to be the best, but what you can have is anything that demonstrates that you're putting your own personal needs and interests above your boat crew, above your teammate, above the mission itself. And if you are not somebody that can do those things, then your reputation, in a lot of cases, you may even be peered out of training altogether. You may even be like, usually there's like a top 5, bottom 5. And it's like, hey, if you're one of those bottom 5 and it's somewhat of a kind of an ethical or integrity type of violation, they're gonna find you out. They're gonna get rid of you, and that'll follow you. And even if you do make it, a reputation will follow you into the teams, right? And again, you can survive a mistake, an honest mistake, but kind of an integrity breach. That's in most cases, that's not survivable, nor should it be.
Right. Oh, I loved you went there. I was thinking back on the teams or the Blue Angels rather, and how we selected people. It was based on what you just said, because the skills at that point are well known. You've been a post instructor, you can tell your reputation is what it is out there. Right. But we're not selecting for that. We're selecting for that chemistry, that bond, that commitment to a purpose. I call it a purpose higher than self. It's exactly what you articulated. It's not about flying the jet impeccably. Yeah, that's you try. And we're always off, we're always correcting anyhow. But it's about the mission of inspiring kids, being a good example to the world out there. And that's the one, you bust that, you're done, man, because that's what we're all about, right? So is that similar to what you just said?
No, that's exactly right. And I would also add, I would say that is also needs to be accompanied by a high degree of humility, right? Nice. Because only, when you can set aside your pride enough to where you can learn from people that may be less experienced from you, you can learn from outside of your organization.
Yep.
And say, yeah, you know what, those people, those firefighters, those LA SWAT cops are doing something that we can learn from, that we can take, right? And it's also like, hey, I've been around I'm prideful, but you know what? I made a mistake and I can receive criticism. It may sting, but I'm going to process that criticism and I'm going to do something with it and action it.
Yeah, let's go further on that, because I think you nailed it. The subtlety between confidence and humility, right? So give me the idea of what does humility mean on the teams? You gave me one example right there. Can you take criticism? Can you apply it? But what does that really mean in the sense of just the way you carry yourself?
Well, and I think engagement as a leader is so important here, because, when you're a young frogman who shows up at the SEAL team, like, you are just trying to keep your head above water. And the last thing you want to do is show any kind of weakness. Right. And so, and especially, when you're young, when you're in your early 20s, you don't want to show any chink in your armor, right? You don't want to, and as you get older, you realize that, you let some of that guard down a little bit, and you're like, hey, you know what? Because if you make a mistake, a lot of times that's not going to be unnoticed. Right. Like, so if you're a leader and you try to brush something under the rug, you try to pretend like it didn't happen, you try to act like you understand what's going on when you don't, like, people see right through that. And so as a leader, that humility has to exist for you to learn, for you to be seen as credible. Because if you're not humble, which means that you can't, people aren't going to be bought in. If you're not humble enough to take input from those around you, peers, subordinates, superiors alike, if you can't take that input and use it, then people aren't going to feel like, they're not going to buy in. They're not going to feel heard, and they're not going to connect with you on your journey.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. We're going to talk about how you guys debrief and where that is a tool for exactly what you said. But how come most Navy SEALs have beards, man? Where'd that come from? I'm looking at you.
Oh, this beard, it comes and goes, right? It depends on when you see me, right? It's here for a little while. Then if it gets too long, I'll shave it out. But yeah, beards and hair, it's always a reputation.
Is it? And why is that? It cracks me up, because I remember post 9/11, all of a sudden you started seeing all the teams guys, usually with a beard and long hair, right? Which is, you could do that if you had to, right? Because of the mission AOR you're going into. But you tell me, what was the thing with that?
Well, it's guys are young. They want to grow their hair out. They want to be different. And again, as you said, there's a time and place for it. And a lot of times, as we say, when we're in garrison, right, it's kind of an Army term, but when you're back by the flagpole, you're at headquarters, you're not overseas deployed. Like, we'd go down range to go spend, 3-5 weeks in Arkansas doing land warfare training. Nobody's shaving, everybody grows their hair out, nobody cares. But when you're back at headquarters, right, and you're not getting ready to deploy, you're not growing your stuff out for deployment, then, you're going to have a decent haircut, and maybe it's going to be a little bit longer than what the average Navy person is, but you're going to have shaved, you're going to have a good haircut. And the guys don't like that, right? And so it's a constant, like, in, one of the commands I was at, SEAL Team 2, it was one of the original teams, and has a reputation for that good order and discipline within the SEAL teams. It's like every Tuesday, no matter rain or shine, no matter how cold it is, you're getting in the water, you're doing your 2-mile ocean swim, right? And I remember being a platoon chief, and I had these guys, they were always pushing it all the time, pushing the length of their hair. And my troop chief would be like, the guys better not show up Monday. Monday morning, they better not show up without a good haircut. And Monday rolls around and we're getting ready for a brief, and 3 of my guys aren't there. And I'm like, where the hell are you guys? You're like, oh, like our stylist was running late. I'm sorry. I was like, oh my God, the stylist is running late. So yeah, that's just, I didn't even know how to, and my troop chief's like, where are they? I'm like, I can't even just tell you what they just told me.
Well, first off, stylists in the Navy SEALs, you wouldn't compare the two usually, but now I get it. All right. Hey, let's dive into a little bit of your background. I know, as a master chief, you guys are really running the teams, right? At least that's my opinion, but I don't know. Give me a little bit backdrop so people, as they're listening, they get a sense of just how excellent your career was.
Well, I came in, I was telling Sugar, one of your teammates there, before we came on, we were discussing, he's like, hey, did you play sports for the Navy? And I'm like, well, I played soccer, but I enlisted. Right out of high school, I took the summer off, got in better shape, and then I enlisted into a Navy's boot camp at 18 years old, right out of high school.
What year was that?
That would have been 92, November of 92 is when I enlisted. And so, the story I always tell is I was really, really bad at math. And I always say, I don't know if I was dumber for being bad at math or for dumber for believing the recruiter when he says that those few points I missed to qualify for SEAL training, whether or not, when he told me I'd get a waiver, I actually believed him. So yeah, dumb in both ways, I suppose. So I spent 2 years working on fast attack submarines at a shore facility in Groton, Connecticut. Fell in with a good mentor, a former SEAL, and he kind of helped train a lot of us up. And I retook my academic test and passed my screening test, and I got orders out to SEAL training in 1995. And so, nice. Yeah, did a bunch of deployments, Europe, Africa, Middle East, Afghanistan.
Pre 9/11, because you're the pre 9/11 group, right?
I was both, right?
Both.
I basically knocked out 3 deployments. I two European deployments. And
which were typically where in that time frame? When you say Europe, where in Europe?
Yeah, so when I deployed, we would have, and I think they've kind of done away with it. We kind of have what's called a Naval Special Warfare Unit, which is geographically, there's one that represents every theater combatant command, and the one in Europe was in Stuttgart, Germany, Panzer Caserta, and I think they've shut those down, but they're basically like the forward deployed infrastructure where they have all your intel folks, your engineering folks, boats, motors, transportation, ordnance, all that kind of stuff. And also, back then we also used to be attached to, a carrier group. Like I was in, my second platoon was what's called a strike platoon, which means we were attached to the 6th Fleet, a carrier group out there. We were kind of embarked on a carrier for a little bit. Got a lot of time off the carrier, fortunately. But yeah, whenever that commander out there needed a special warfare capability, we would be in support of those. As opposed to in Europe, when you're at a unit, you work for a theater special operations command, a geographic combatant commander, and then the theater special operations command under that.
So I was, in the early mid 80s and early and mid 90s. And I'd see you guys, deployed, embarked on a carrier. And I'm thinking that's gotta suck as a SEAL, right? You don't want to be on the carrier. You want to be out there doing stuff. How'd you keep strong? How did you keep, I just remember working out with the guys on the hangar bay, but what was it like to be on the carrier for those times?
I probably would be saying too much here, but I will say, I think the really bad deployments that guys really hated were called the MARGs, right? And that's where you're attached to like an amphib ship with the Marines. But we were on our deployment was the John F. Kennedy, which was the last nuclear powered aircraft carrier. And I'm not going to lie, had it.
Non-nuclear.
Non-nuclear. Yeah. The last non-nuclear aircraft carrier. And we lived like kings. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. We had our own, it's called the AF SAS, which was an engineering space. And you could lock it from the inside, which was useful because there were women on ships, right? But I shouldn't say that, right? But but we had our own gym.
Cool.
We
what
had
you're saying was you got to lock you guys away from.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So and we had berthing that we shared with EOD guys, and it was actually not bad. We got off there a lot, but when we on there, we did jujitsu, and we and we worked out. And then every once in a while, a lot of times we take some flights out. We do some aerial target practice, shooting ammo cans out of the helos and stuff like that. So it really wasn't that bad, but we actually got off the ship and we spent the millennium, the New Year's Eve of 99, 2000 in Bahrain. And it was probably one of the most fun experiences of my life, at least cool. as a young single guy.
Tell me, what was that like? I mean, because remember that was YK, whatever.
Yeah, well, it's funny, myself included. I was an E5, a petty officer second class at the time, and a bunch of us. Some of the guys flew their wives in, and so they were breaking off, doing their thing, and a lot of us were kind of like, they locked us down because it was like a threat condition, right? They were like, no, you guys have a curfew at midnight. And we're like, that sucks. And we had terrible attitudes, right? Well, before long, we have these flats out in town. And before long, all these girls start coming over to our flat to party. And I'll just leave it at that. But yeah,
that's a good way to bring in the new year, the new century.
There was a lot more women than there were guys. So it worked out nicely.
Yeah, we like to say target rich environment.
Exactly. It's exactly right.
All right. Hey, a couple of things real quick, because some people are watching this on YouTube. Talk to me about the helmets behind you and your gear back there.
Yeah, I got a whole bunch of stuff behind me, but there's a aviation helmet. Wrong hand. Aviation helmet there. I have that there because that was my uncle. My uncle was a naval aviator. Nice. He flew a couple of different aircraft. I think the one that I always thought was the coolest was the A1E Sky Raider. And I think that was his favorite plane. And this, you're talking late 50s, early 60s. And then he retired stayed in the reserves and flew he was a captain for American Airlines. But he was my maternal uncle. And he was the guy that I always looked up to. Like, he was a bachelor with the jet setting lifestyle, but he was really instrumental in guiding me and really kind of, I think just having that one person in your corner, because my parents, they were really, they just weren't into the military. They didn't want me to join the military at all. And he was kind of that one guy that understood me and supported me. And really, he took me down to Little Creek to meet real SEALs and understand. Wow. And so, and he actually, when I was broke as an E1, and he paid for my tutoring so I could get better at learning, at taking the military test again. And so again, he was always there, and he was very instrumental in the success of my life, I believe. And so I just kind of have that back there. And on the opposite side,
what was his call sign? Do you know?
That's a good question. I don't remember. I think it might've been just PJ. That was like that was his nickname, PJ. Yeah. But,
and we talk about call signs. How did you get yours?
Yeah. Mine's Drummy. Yep. And it's nothing, and it's not a good story. It's not a funny story, right? It's basically a play on my last name, obviously. But yeah. I mean, I don't even know. I probably shouldn't even tell the story, but we're doing land warfare training up at Camp Ripley in Minnesota. And we've been out in the field for probably 5-7 days, and we're all hungry. And we go to the little canteen they have, like old World War II barracks, and they're selling a bunch of fried food. And the guy in front of me is like,
that's my favorite food group, by the way. My wife says fried, which is not healthy. I get it. But anyhow, keep going.
Anyway, the guy's in front of me was like, I'll have the Drummy Basket. It was like the chicken Drummy Basket. And it just kind of stuck, it's kind of not a good story at all, but that's where it came from.
So wait a minute, were you with the team guys, or was that before?
No, I was I spent 2 years in the fleet. No, for basically Buds in 95 till I retired in 2019, I was with the SEALs the whole time. My last tour was up at the Navy's boot camp, but I was still there fulfilling a SEAL job. But yeah, that was, I think, my third deployment, or my third platoon. We're doing, before we deployed to Europe, we're just doing our land warfare training up there. Because not as much now, but still to a degree, but definitely back then, or up to the mid 2000s, where all of our training, almost all of it, is out of the area, right? We have to travel to places all over the Southern United States for urban warfare training, land warfare, diving, and Key West. So we're gone a lot.
Did you ever come out to the West, or is that just the West Coast teams like Idaho, and do any training out here?
Yeah. Are you in Idaho?
Yeah, I'm in Sun Valley.
Oh God, I'm so jealous. We could go on, but that's my my dream, just to move to a mountain town, right? But yeah, we did some training. As a matter of fact, the last trip I set up when I was a troop chief was to Butte, Montana. where we went out there, and because, guys getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan, things like that. And setting up different training and for high altitude stuff. But it was also just, I'm not going to lie, it was a good deal.
Yeah.
Riding ATVs, doing climbing, doing high angle shooting from like elk hunting lodges. And there's a big old abandoned hospital we were doing hits on for close quarter combat assault training. So, it was just a good deal trip. And then like on the weekends, we go up to Big Sky, go skiing and things like that. So it was.
Did you ever run into Vince Bercelli? I can't say his right name. Basically, he's doing all that training, as a contractor right up here off of Sun Valley. They do, long range sniper, high altitude shots. And did you ever run into him, Vince?
No, we were working with an organization that was kind of facilitating a lot of that stuff called Peak out of Butte.
Okay. Yeah. This guy, Vince, heads up Spear Tactical. I don't know if you heard about it.
Yeah, I've heard of Spear Tactical. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it. And, he tells me, and he comes out there, he brings the teams out to his house, and he's got all the flags up because they give it to him afterwards and all that. And, but man, you talk about, I'm with you, talk about a good deal while you're training, to be up in the mountains, to do that kind of training. And I think, that's pretty special, because with the SEALs, you guys get access to equipment, you get access to training that most people don't. Give me a story. No. What was some of the cool, either equipment or training things you went on?
Well, I think a lot of it's like, one particular, that was the good deal that I set up. But when I think the deployment before that, we were getting ready to go to Iraq. And so we set up some rut training, realistic urban training. And we're down in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and just doing hits, like basically waking up and at this really nice hotel in Fort Lauderdale, having good food, sitting by the pool for a little while, then going downtown and doing some stuff, just clearing abandoned buildings and things like that. And that was just a lot of fun. I know one particular great training was, I set that training up in Montana. So that was all about like the stuff I like, mountains and snow and things like that. But I remember doing one deployment. We deployed to Southern Norway, and we did like about a week of jumping, right on the coast there. And then after that, we spent a week up climbing in the Lofoten Islands, which is up above the Arctic Circle, summertime. But it was just climbing and jumping, good, fun stuff. I've always liked the driving, like the tactical high performance driving. That stuff is like one of my favorite things to do. So you're right. We got very fortunate in a lot of the training and equipment we got to use.
On the driving, my wife was a stunt woman. So she talks about, driving cars and, doing the 180 spins, but you're talking about tactical equipment, right?
We're talking about like going to a track and driving cars, right? And a lot of it's, one of the missions we would have is personal security details, mobile security details. And so there's a driving component, right? And you go and you have fun and you race around tracks like idiots, trying not to wreck cars. And then you add on the tactical element of moving in your vehicle convoys. And then also, do off-road performance driving, right? You go and you learn, you go to like a commercial off-road racing school, and they show you how to kind of do a version of navigation, and they show you how to, like the Humvees, are very, very capable vehicles. And so they would really teach you how to kind of get the most out of them. I mean, they're not high horsepower, but the way they're geared, the way their hubs are geared, they're locking, you apply the locking system with the gas and the brake pedal. They're very, very capable.
Oh, that's awesome. I hope people are listening that, I'm like you. I believe the military is a great career, and, some parents probably are worried and all that, and I respect that, but it's great that your uncle supported you. But I remember just the opportunities one gets, especially as a young person in the military. I don't think you can replicate that in the civilian world. What do you think?
No, because the bottom line is, if you show up and you have a good head on your shoulders, and you're a decent human, and you're willing to collaborate and do for the people to the left and right of you, and show up to work on time with good attitude and work hard, there's no limit to what you can do and where you can go, just about whatever physical, restrictions you have. But other than that, you can have a great career. You can apply to be an officer if you're an enlisted guy. You can get free education. And And I always say, I try to encourage people, if they're going to go in the military, to have a plan. But at the end of the day, if you just are lost and you're just, you lack discipline in your life, and you just go in the military for 4 years or even less, you get some structure, you get some accountability, you get a little bit of direction and guidance. Like, I can't see how you're not going to be better off after that. Right. And, obviously, there's risk that's associated with deploying downrange, but in most cases, most jobs in the military are not combat related, right? Unless, you're on a ship and missiles are being fired at a ship. But in reality, and there's a downside to that too. There's a downside with the mentality of joining. And that was big in the 90s, joining the Navy because you don't want to be on the ground getting shot. Right. Well, it's true. And then all of a sudden now, when there is a likelihood of going to war against a peer, near peer adversary like the Russians or the Chinese, now we got to start thinking a lot more like those sailors in Midway, in 1942. Right. So,
yeah, man, I'm with you. Hey, I want to tap into your new book, because thanks for all that backdrop. I think people are pretty excited about where your expertise comes from, but I'm really interested in how you're applying that expertise out in the world. So first off, I know you got a new book coming out. It's called what? Life on the X. What's the subtitle on that book?
It's Navy SEAL's Guide to Meeting Any Challenge with Courage, Confidence, and Readiness.
So talk to me.
Yeah. So first off, the title, Life on the X, the X. So in the military, there's a term we use, right? It's the X, and that X, it's a military doctrine term. And you can think of it as X marks a spot, or X marks the objective, right? And so, for example, you fast drop out of a helicopter on a rooftop of a building you're assaulting, you refer to that as landing on the X. Or you drive up to the front door in your armored trucks, you get out, you put a breaching charge, you blow through, you clear that objective. That's driving up to the X. We also use it if we're patrolling down the street, thinking on vehicles or in vehicles or on foot, and the enemy ambushes you, has you in a kill zone, or a fatal cone of fire, as we like to call it. In that case, we often say we got to get off that X. We got to get out of that kill zone. But if we take that metaphor and we apply it to our everyday lives in the professional and the personal sense, it's a good metaphor, because there are specific situations, events, moments, periods in time in our everyday lives where, nobody's getting shot at, nobody's getting killed, but it is a moment where the opportunity exists, right? And in that moment of opportunity, there may be pressure, there may be stress, and all it matters is that you're able to bring your A game. You're able to bring your best self to that moment. And again, that could be a pitch, that could be a client engagement. It also could be after you got to engage with your high school kid, after you got a call from the principal saying they just did something really stupid. How can you prepare and make sure that you're giving that situation and that person exactly what they need to move forward?
I love it. Yeah, it's a great title. And now give me some of the backdrop. So what have you learned that you want to teach people?
Yeah. And so thank you. As I was getting ready, as I was in the twilight of my career, wondering like, what the hell am I going to do next? Right? What am I going to do after the Navy? I don't want to go work in a cubicle somewhere. I don't want to ride a train to the city of Chicago every day. What am I going to do? And I started to really kind of do some self-reflection. I realized, I enjoyed a lot of my time in my combat time and the operational stuff. But if I really look back and look at where I made the biggest impact in my career, it was, as an instructor, as a trainer. And the last thing that I was able to do before I retired from the Navy was I basically got approached along with a chaplain and a clinical psychologist. The three of us were said, hey, we need to make our young sailors and our young officers tougher, meaning like, hey, missiles being fired at ships, the conventional Navy, not the SEAL teams, we got to get them ready we got to get them to train and learn and fight like warriors. And so we developed a program. We developed a program based on kind of mind, body, soul, where the psychologist is about mental skills training, mindfulness, mind, body connection. The chaplain is about the spiritual side of things, character development, those type of things. And they bring me in as the SEAL because, hey, we have to have some people that actually should know what they're talking about when it comes to combat. And I brought in my processes for how we kind of plan, prepare, and execute for combat operations.
Go into more of that: plan, prepare, execute, and then you're going to debrief too. But tell me the system you brought in.
Yeah. And so my initial framework that I developed it's a 4-part framework. And you can think of it as, and I know the audience may or may not know the OODA loop, right? It's Air Force Colonel John Boyd. And it goes in like a circle. Think, observe, orient, decide, act. And it's in a adversarial combat role. Whoever's able to move through that loop faster, the one of the two engaged in a dogfight, whoever's able to move through that faster is likely going to have the upper hand. And so with that as kind of my inspiration, my framework was commit, prepare, execute, and reflect. And the first part is the character pieces with commitment, right? If you want to do things of consequence, if you want to do hard stuff in the face of challenge, then you got to know who you are and what you stand for and what you're willing to do to be ready for those moments. And so one of the things that I would always have, when I work, whether it's with one-on-one coaching clients or whether it's at a workshop, is create a personal mission statement. Mm-hmm. And we started having people do this in boot camp, right? My prior role before Warrior Toughness was to get young men and women to get ready for their next phase in the pipeline to be SEALs, divers, special boat crewmen. And we'd have them write a personal mission statement. And the coolest thing about writing this book was that I got to interview a lot of really high level performers. And I know when it comes to that personal mission statement, the cleanest and most succinct one was from this former MLB All-Star, 2-time MLB All-Star veteran. Oh. And he had his mission statement, and it was a mantra. And it started in middle school. It's like, I'm a pro. That's all he would say is, I'm a pro. And what he meant by that was when he got off the bus.
Who was that, by the way?
Michael Gadier.
I love it.
When he got off that bus to go play a game, he would say to himself, I'm a pro. And when he said I'm a pro, it means that my uniform is pressed, my shoes are clean, my hat's on straight. As he progressed, as he got older and he went to high school, when all of his friends are going out to parties, he's like, nope, I'm a pro. A pro does not get drunk when he's got a game the next day or so or practice. When it was football season, he said a pro will also go take batting practice in the off season. And so it's just that kind of thing. It's really understanding what your values, what your personal beliefs are, and then aligning those through principles, through actions and behaviors. And that's what it is. You have your values, but you got to live them through principled decisions.
What is your personal mission statement?
So I'll give you my professional one. My professional mission statement is I work to get better every day, even if it's just a little bit. Okay. I don't crumble when things get hard. I seek opportunity in all situations, no matter how difficult. I exist to be of service, and I do for the people to the left and right. Right. And I think the thing is, right, is that's my mission statement. That's how I want to show up. Right. And so I do things that make sure that my principled decisions that go with that mission statement. Right. So I make sure that I'm rehearsing, that I'm constantly leveling up my skills as a professional speaker. I make sure that I bring that element of customer service with everybody I engage with, to make sure that I try to make them feel special no matter what their role is, things like that. And I think the truth is that there's days when I fall short of that, right? Especially in my personal life, there's days where I'm not that person that I want to be, right? And it's easy in that moment to kind of, throw your hands up and just kind of think yourself a fraud. But the reality is that's the human experience, right? We stray from the path. We fall short sometimes. But the difference is that we have to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable, but we forgive ourselves and we commit to getting back on the path, engaging in the behaviors and actions that are where we want to go and who we want to be.
That's that reflection process you talked about, the fourth step, right? And I concur with you. It is a circle, right? Tell me, how do you teach or how do you do the reflection process?
Well, and that's where we can get into the debriefs. Yeah. Right. And the reflection process, it's definitely a bigger concept, right? Daily reflection. Right. And I think that was always, there's not a lot of stuff. There's things that I struggle with in the SEAL teams as an operator, as a leader, right? Some things came easy to me, but a lot of things I had to really, really work at. And I think one strength of mine is my ability to kind of reflect and process.
Oh, nice.
Now, I think all of us to a degree can sometimes carry baggage, right? We have trauma from being a kid or from the mistakes we made, right? And we can kind of let that baggage kind of encumber us. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, I was always able to kind of put things into perspective, right? And I think the big thing, and this was really clear to me, and I think people ask me the hardest part of SEAL training, and for me, they think I'm going to say Hell Week, and Hell Week, right? It's the most difficult in terms of how many people it attrites. But for me, it was like the first 5 days, because to me, that was worse than Hell Week, because you're just like, it's the first, like, and you can't even see a glimpse of the finish line the first week into that 6-month journey. And they just hammer the crap out of you. And I remember coming back, it was probably like the end, it was like probably Thursday. And I come back to my barracks room and all my roommates are packing up their stuff. And I'm like, what's going on, fellas? We moving? We going somewhere? They're like, no, we're done. We don't want this anymore. And to me, though, I had the ability to, even when I felt like quitting, and I would stop and I'd be like, wait, they can't keep doing this for the entire 6 months. At a certain point, they're going to have to start teaching us some shit. Right. So it's like, hey, you can manage this. Like, you've done this. This is hard. It can't get that much worse. You just got to keep driving through. And I think when I made mistakes, I could be like, all right, what's the lesson here? How do I make sure that I don't repeat that moving forward?
And now let's break that down to, how did you do it personally? So what you just described, there's got to be a process that you go through. And then how do you do it as a team on the teams?
Well, so that's a great opportunity for me to kind of talk about feedback, if I can. And the reason I talk about feedback is because there's some research that I encountered when I was writing this book. And the research says that a lot of times as a leader, when you're giving feedback, it's not nearly as effective as you think it is, as you need it to be. Because in a lot of cases, when you're receiving the type of feedback, right, as the feedback recipient, whether it's constructive, corrective, whatever you want to call it, it could be construed as negative. A lot of times your immediate reaction to that is to be defensive, right? You're going to misremember your role in something not going according to plan. You're going to blame it on something or someone else. And you may even call into question the person that's giving you that feedback in the first place. And knowing that, the cure for that, or the fix to that, is to kind of take that, minimize the shoulda, coulda, wouldas when you're giving feedback, and instead make it future focused. And so if you flip that around and say, and this is to your question, right? When I would receive feedback, there's a lot of times when that feedback would sting, and I could feel, and I know I would get defensive, but I also knew that if I could walk away and I could spend some time sitting with it, stewing on it, that eventually I would be able to lower kind of that defensiveness and be able to more deliberately kind of pick through some of that feedback. And I remember one particular training operation, and it's a longer story, but we got back and the mission hadn't. I was a senior enlisted leader, right? And I was kind of in charge of the tactics and the training. Yep. And so I was in the position of responsibility for things not going well. And this instructor, he's kind of a famous guy. Everybody knows who he is, but
what's his name?
I don't want to say it, but he starts setting in on us, basically like, you guys should have done that back when I was there. I would have done this, and you should have thought, and immediately I could just feel the walls just going down.
Wow.
Right. And I could tell all the guys are probably, the people that I'm leading are probably seeing that I'm not picking up what he's putting down. Right. And so I'm defensive. But I realized after I walked away, after I did that, I was like, you know what? I got to be an adult here. Like, as a professional, as a leader, I have to give it its due diligence. I have to make sure that even if there's things that I didn't agree with, I have to be professional enough to dig through that, because I expect the same from the people that I lead. I expect them to take feedback on board. And if I was being honest, there were some things that I could pull out of that we could use as it related to kind of varying light conditions with our night vision going overseas in Iraq. And so, and I think that's the big thing, is sometimes you just have to remind yourself. And so when I tell people, when you're getting ready to get feedback, just say these things. First, I choose to believe this person is trying to help me. And two, it's an opportunity for my growth and my development. You got to tell yourself that, because it doesn't matter how crudely or awkwardly the feedback's given. It's your responsibility as a professional to make sure there's not something there they can use. And in most cases, there is.
That's great. I love that. I choose to believe. So it's the idea of looking at someone else as them trying to help you. You want to know that they're really there to help you, right? So I choose to believe. And then what was the second one? That there's actually something I can gain?
It's your opportunity.
That's opportunity.
And if you listen, one of the big things I'm with, and I even say that when I talk about life on the X, right? It's seeking opportunity. And I get into the book a little bit about Stoicism, capital S, right? The Stoic practice, philosophers of the Greeks and the Romans, right? Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, people like that. And a lot of that is about opportunity, right? It's seeing less about things being good or bad and seeking the opportunity in all situations. And that's why it's in my mission statement, right? And you wouldn't think, right? If I'm going to tell you, Gucci, hey, you just suffered a loss of a loved one, a job, something went wrong, on a combat operation, a helicopter crashed, and I'm going to say, hey, what's the opportunity here? You'd look at me like I was crazy. But when you start seeing more things as opportunities, it enables you to start to optimize success in that situation. Now, you may not meet with the original intent of your mission, right? It may not be. It may still hurt. It may still be painful. But what's the opportunity? Well, in loss, it's an opportunity to lean in to my other relationships, right? It's an opportunity as a leader to demonstrate poise, adaptability, and greater leadership qualities. And so there's always opportunity if we choose to see it and take it.
That's a key insight. I love what you did. Tell me more about the Stoics, because there's some real great lessons you can learn there. I like what you did about the opportunity. Life, it appears, it comes at us duality, good, bad, plus, minus, male, female. In reality, it's not, in my opinion, right? And so what I hear you saying is when you are approached with a situation, and let's say, it's a bad situation or however you want to label that, there's a different view to that exact same situation. And I hear you taking the positive view. You're taking the opportunity view. And too many people get stuck on the fear, really. And so tell me more how, number one, did I get that right? And how did the Stoics approach that?
Well, and the Stoics would look at it less as good or bad.
Okay.
Right. And so they would say, as an example, you would say, well, wealth, right? Well, a lot of us would say, well, great wealth would be a good thing. Right. And then the Stoics would turn around and say, okay, well, is it a good thing? Mm-hmm. If somebody has malevolent purposes and they take that wealth to destroy things, if they take that wealth and use it to oppress people, is that a good thing? Right. Or the poor man that acts a virtue, that doesn't have wealth, but does great things and is able to still leave their mark on the world. Right. And you can say the same thing with sickness and health. What do you do with that health? Do you squander it? Right. Or are you still able to be productive in sickness? Right. So when it really doesn't matter, it's really about the decisions and the choices that you make with whatever the situation that you find yourself in.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that. It's a great observation, because in reality, I don't think it's dualistic. And that's the challenge, is life appears to be coming at us with that. But the approach you're taking, and the Stoics took, is that it depends. Right? It could be either. You have some choice in this matter. So how do you take a person, let's say depression? Okay, you mentioned wealth and sickness. Sickness is an obvious one. Let's say someone's depressed, and we know that on the SEALs and in the Navy, we don't like to talk about it, but mental health is a real challenge, right? I think I just heard a stat: 18 veterans commit suicide a day.
I think it's higher than that, actually.
See, that is absolutely absurd.
The last I heard, it was 22.
22 a day. Okay. So
I don't know if that's right. That's the last thing I heard. So
right. No, I got you. So let's take depression, and someone comes to you and you're coaching them and you see they're depressed, or they say they're depressed. What's your approach?
Well, my first thing is right away, I talk a lot about in the book, we talk about mental skills training. And I even go a step further and we talk about mindfulness or meditation. Okay, but I'm really clear to point out that in many cases, none of that is a substitute for the right type of, counseling, right? Professional counseling, right? Seeing a psychologist, psychiatrist, really getting CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy is one of them, right? That's not like, if you're having some issues, like that has to be a starting point, which means that, hey, and I'll even take it a step further and I'll be like, okay, so say you're not depressed, right? Performance and other types of psychology, you can look at it as, okay, maybe I'm not in a really bad place, but can I be better? Right. And that's always the thing. And then and 9 times out of 10, you can be better. But when it comes to those things, I was working a project with a friend of mine, and she's known as the celebrity psychologist, Dr. Elizabeth Lombardo. And I worked under her, and she does a few things that I really like. And one of her things is really for people to get better at listening to their inner world, right? All of the type of thoughts, right? Because we often underestimate the power that our thoughts have in either helping or hurting us. In many cases, especially like even when we're not talking about, depression, we're talking about performance. We're talking about, hey, I got a big pitch. I got something, I'm feeling stressed. Things aren't maybe going as I hope they would or plan them to. It's easy for me to have these negative thoughts that start to derail my performance. And so I always say, you can ill afford to let that stuff play in the background. You have to write that dialogue. And one of the things that she does with her clients is she says, hey, you need to be better at checking your thoughts. It's almost like, and this is where a lot of the mindfulness comes in, is you got to be better at listening to your inner world by checking your thoughts, right? So immediately you start to sense that you feel a way that you don't want to feel, right? You're doing something that you know is not really going to be effective. All right, what are the thoughts? Like if I was a cartoon character right now, what would my thought bubble be saying, right? Would it be saying I made a mistake, I'm an idiot, I'm so stupid, I'm going to do it again just like I did it before, I'm never going to get this right? Or would we, just like I said earlier, would we stop and be like, yeah, I made a mistake, I'm human. All right, here's the fix. Okay, here's how we're moving out on this right now, right? And I know that sounds like a little thing, but when you start making those habits to constantly replacing those thoughts with thoughts that serve you and reframing the situation, that makes a huge difference.
I like the reframing, and the reframing in your own mind first, right? Because perceptions, I mean, I believe the world's coming from us, not at us. So, it's a deep idea. So if you believe that, then you can reframe a situation. How I perceive a situation, whether it's a threat or opportunity, I mean, that's the classic chaos in Chinese, right? It's both, right? It could be either. How do you approach that?
Well, I mean, I think there's also those things such as cognitive distortions. It's another thing I learned from Dr. Lombardo, right? And the cognitive distortions are, for example, you walk down the hallway, and I talked to like a high school kid, right? You walk down a hallway and you wave to somebody, they don't wave back.
Yeah.
You start to jump ahead. Oh, they must not like me. They must be pissed at me. Or that may be true, but what also may be true is they didn't see you.
Right.
I text that person, they never texted me back. They may hate me. They might not like me. But what's also true is they may have not seen the test. They may have had something really crazy going on themselves. So why don't we first detach a little bit from those things and just see what the actual truth of the situation is, or reframe it automatically and reframe it by saying, you know what? They didn't text me back. They probably had something else going on. It's okay. I'll catch up with them at another time, right? You immediately jump to what's productive.
There you go. That's very helpful. Hey, a couple of quick stories. We're just going on and on. I mean, this is epic. And your book, I can tell, has got a lot of depth to it. I want to go in there, but tell me a little bit. Sugar said, hey, you got to ask about your brother, Colin. Tell me a little bit about what you've learned from Colin.
Yeah. So Colin is my brother. He's 4 years older. He's severely mentally disabled. It's so funny. It's like, in the world of political correctness, I don't even know what the term was. I don't even know what the latest and greatest term is to describe him, but he has a rare disease where he looks perfectly normal, but he has no ability to do anything more than basic functions. And it was always a challenge growing up with him. Sorry about that.
No worries. That's an angel coming in. First off, is it okay to talk about him? Because I watched your face. I mean, I just want to make sure that it's okay.
Yeah, no, it's perfectly all right. I've talked about it before on other podcasts. So growing up, it was challenging, right? Because I didn't always understand. He looked normal, and I would say, well, I remember talking to my parents, I'm like, well, when is he going to get better? When is he going to learn? I didn't know. And all I knew is I had to share a room with him, and he was always destroying all my stuff. And, and I think, and I would, as a kid, you can be kind of self-absorbed, right? And you get all the attention is lavished on that kid really because it's needed. Right. And you can get resentful because of that, right? You can get resentful because of things you don't have. but then as part of growing up and being mature, you realize like, man, my parents really did the best that they could, right? They really dealt with, a very challenging situation. And I never had to worry about whether I would have clothes, whether I'd have a roof over my head or food to eat. Like I always had all my needs met. And so at the end of the day, you can take that and you can say, hey, you know what, there's an opportunity for gratitude here.
Nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot probably to unpack there, but yeah.
No, that's cool. I like where you went to gratitude, because I personally think that's the underpinning of Glad to Be Here is gratitude is such a powerful tool, especially in a situation. And that's an extreme situation. I can only imagine what it's like to, be in the room and growing up like that and trying to figure it out. What were you able to do to overcome those, let's say, fears that you had or whatever, resentments to love? And were you able to?
Yeah, I will tell you right now, I'm still a work in progress, and I think it's so funny. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. It's, as young frogmen growing up, again, it was like, don't show weakness. Yeah. Your armor's on at all times. And, it's kind of a cruel culture. You spot weakness and you just attack. But it's also kind of like it's like I would imagine like what it's like to have brothers, right? And real actual brothers where you're just constantly merciless, but then you're always going to be there for one another at the same time. And so there is that piece. And I think that as you get older and you mature, you realize you're like, I don't have to be carrying this, I don't have to be carrying these weapons or armor all the time. And you realize when you actually have conversations with your old teammates, it's really kind of incredible how vulnerable you can be with one another now, that you could never be that way. And I think once you are able to have those conversations, it's really like, hey man, like there's a lot of stuff that I need to do better. Right. And there's nothing wrong with me right now saying that I still struggle sometimes, right? That I still have things that challenge me, that I still stray from the path, that I still got a lot of work to do. Right. And I think the people that can't recognize that, I don't know. I think there's a level of honesty that they're maybe not having with themselves.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Do you guys have a lot of reunions, the Navy SEALs, with your teams? Is it official, non-official? How do you do
there's a couple different things. There's a couple like subunits that will have their own things. There's typically the East Coast and the West Coast reunion. And I think it's like, and I haven't been to one in a while. But yeah, it's usually in the middle of the summer, one on the East Coast, West Coast. Then there's like the original Frogman training was in Fort Pierce, Florida. And that's down where the UDT SEAL Museum is. And so they'll usually kind of do a muster there once a year as well. I think I left Virginia Beach. I left the main area of the SEAL teams. And, I felt like for my own health, I did want to put a little bit of distance between a lot of that. And so I've kind of done that. Now that's a downside. I tell you what, since I have not laughed like deep belly dying laugh since I've kind of left the military, right? I missed kind of a lot of that. So there are a lot of things that I miss. I miss purpose. I miss a lot of those things in terms of like training, right? The physical things aligned with that combat purpose. But, I think as I get a little bit older, I'm going to probably try to kind of reconnect, right? I think that's common for guys like us.
Yeah, it is. Same thing in the Blues. Typically when you leave for the next, 5 or 10 years, you still got a career going on. And so you're focused on that. And then it's afterwards you start to reconnect. And just like you said, the best stories come out in the bar and you realize, holy shit, I didn't know you remember that. And here's the real story. And then you go back to the older guys and you find out that tradition is just 1 year older and they did something different. And anyhow, it's such a cool when you can let that armor down, like you said, in a safe environment, right? With that.
Well, that's right. I went skiing with the guy this winter time, a guy that he was always one of my favorite guys. Just, he had this very rare quality of being able to make everyone laugh and it not being at someone else's expense, which is a rare quality and just a funny, great guy. Didn't spend a long time in the SEAL teams, but we went out skiing in Utah and all we did was just reminisce and tell stories. And it was great. It was really great to just
Was it Snowbird, Alta? Where'd you go?
Yeah, both those places.
Yeah.
The snow wasn't great, but the company was world-class. So yeah.
That's awesome. Hey, two things as we wrap up. I want to go back into, you created or helped create that course, that mental toughness course, like warrior toughness program for the Navy. And we were starting to talk about that. And I find that really interesting that they brought in a psychologist, a chaplain, and then you. Tell me a little bit about, well, what did you learn? What did you create? And what did you learn?
Yeah. And so essentially the quick rundown of the program was Admiral, we always had this joke, right? A Navy SEAL, a chaplain, and a psychologist walk into a bar, right? But we could never really determine a good punchline. But it was kind of like they were like, hey, you three figure it out. We got sailors that are not acting as warriors right now. They joined so they didn't have to be in combat. And it's kind of reflected when we see combat situations in the fleet. And so we're like, all right. So we're like, hey, where do we start? Well, we start at boot camp. And so our program was the three of us developed curriculum to train the drill instructors, which are called recruit division commanders. That's the Navy drill sergeants. And so our job was to train the trainer. Mm-hmm. And so we would do mental skills training. Like, so before they would do their survival swimming, before they would do firefighting training, line handling, like a lot of like the stress inducing events, we would have them do specific mental skills exercises that they would practice in that environment. We would have them do daily mindfulness training. We would have them do kind of character development classes and things like that. And that was it was initially like a program that we would teach for 8 weeks. And as it went on, the program has started to develop and expand. And I stayed on an extra year to help export it to the officer community, ROTC, and OCS. And so it's continuing to grow. They're trying to figure out how they can put it in the other different pipelines of training in the Navy and actually get it out to the fleet. And so I think it's been really exciting. I've been really fortunate and blessed to kind of be a part of that on the ground level. And so, I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes, but it's really that mind, body, soul. It's like, I think probably one of the most interesting things about that was like, hey, we got a psychologist, a SEAL, and a chaplain, but we all had a lot of things there's a lot of connective tissue with where we were coming from, right? A warrior mindset, right? Based on character, based on the Stoics and things like that. And I just learned so much, right? That's when I really started to learn more about philosophy like that. So when I really started to learn mental skills training, because you learn them intuitively in roles like combat type jobs like we have. But when you're taught it intentionally, then you're able to kind of better use it through the other areas of your life, your personal relationships and things like that.
That's a big point. I remember, in the military, we never got that training per se, a formal, but like you said, you learn it. It's how you survive, right? And to be able to understand it afterwards, understand the why, not just the how. Give me a couple examples of, first off, what is that daily practice that you taught them?
Yeah, so we would do, the daily mindfulness training. It would start off very slow. And one of the signature pieces was what we called recalibrate, right? So picture this young 18-year-old kid, first time away from home. Maybe they've never really done anything hard. They're at the Navy's boot camp, been there for several weeks. They drinking from a fire hose of information. They miss home. They're stressed out. They haven't been sleeping. And now we're doing some stressful training, like a firefighting training scenario. And the instructor's yelling at them because they're screwing up. And it's one of those literally like they're up in the red zone, as psychologists call it, right? That fight, flight, or freeze. And they just lock up. They're just over. They just shut down. Well, the old way would be to kick him, give him a kick in the ass, push him back in, continue to yell at them because that's going to make them tougher. But what we know is that they're only going to be tougher and more capable if there's a level of adaptation that occurs. And so what we do now is we pull them out because all training value is lost at this point. And so we tell that recruit to recalibrate. And what that is something they've already been trained on. We just give them the reminder. And when they recalibrate, what they're going to do is they're going to stop. They're going to inhale for 7 seconds. They're going to inhale for 6 seconds through their nose, filling their diaphragms. They're going to hold for 2 seconds, and they're going to exhale for 7 seconds. They're going to repeat. They're going to stay focused on the breathing. And as they start to physiologically lower some of that arousal, lower some of that energy, then we're going to remind them of what their specific procedures and sequences they need to think about to be successful. And we push them in there. And typically 9 times out of 10 at this point, they're going to be successful. And so from there, then we start to get a little bit more detailed. Then we start to do we start to use more imagery, right? We do mental scans. Then we do what we call progressive muscle relaxation, where they tense and release and we start to get slightly more progressive to where they're doing it every day. And we hope that a lot of it sticks and it becomes a habit for them.
Where do those numbers come from? 6, 2, and 7 in the breathing. Do you know?
Well, that was a basic prescription. And I'll be honest, my psychologist taught that to us. And I don't know exactly where she got the specific numbers, because you'll hear a lot about box breathing, right? Which is the 4, 4, 4, 4, right? What I learned was that it's less important about the actual counting. I think the counting's it's a good general thing to start off with. But if you're like a lot more agitated as opposed to be completely relaxed, your breathing capacity is going to be a lot different. And so what I was taught was just make your breathing. A lot of times, people are like, take a deep breath. Well, like what we learned is that floods the brain with more oxygen and kind of increases that fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
But if it's long and slow breathing, that's when you start to lower that energy. And so that's when it's like, hey, make sure that you inhale, make sure that you pause, and that you exhale. Try to exhale longer than your inhalation point. Pause and repeat. And so I think that's what I do. So when I do it at the end of the night, or when I don't count how long I breathe. And there's apps that can help with that. Breathe to relax apps. But I try to actually count my exhalation breaths.
Right.
I'll do like 3 sets of 10. And that's more of a kind of a mindfulness focusing thing as well.
I love that. I agree with you. I think the research shows that if you're trying to down regulate because you're stressed out, then you want your exhales to be longer than your inhales, just what you said, whether it's 7 seconds, 4, whatever, right? But they should be longer and smoother. But on the other hand, if you want to amp yourself up, that's shallow breathing, right? That's going to amp you up, right? So do they teach box breathing in the Navy or the SEALs, or is that just like
they may now? I always say, exactly to your point. Yeah. We didn't have the mental skills, right? We learned it all intuitively. Like I learned that if I want to, as I described at the beginning of the podcast, if I said, hey, I want to make sure that I got my stuff together, I'm going to focus on, I'm going to mentally rehearse what's going to happen. Same thing. If I'm riding into an objective on a helicopter, right? I'm going through, all right, what's my contingency plans? What happens if we get contacted when we hit the ground, right? What happens if we get contacted by the enemy halfway to the objective? What happens if this, right? I'm going through those contingency plans in my head. But I like what you said about it's down regulating, because what we actually taught was energy management, which could be in some cases, right? Like you put loud music, right? You put loud music on to get amped before a workout or a run. And in many cases, when I would work with high school athletes, I would say, let's develop different playlists depending on what you want, right? And to actually regulate to get the effect. But in terms of where I was going, I rambled a little bit, but back to the original question, I didn't learn that. I know when I was teaching Warrior Toughness, we went back to a couple of the commands in Virginia Beach, and man, the stuff that they were doing, you're talking float tanks, you're talking yoga rooms, like the mental skills is like a much larger part now. And so I don't know exactly what they're teaching for breathing right now in the SEAL teams, but that's what we use.
Well, I think that's key. And it's not just the SEAL teams, it's in business and life, right? That's where that exponential increase can come, is in that mental toughness, that mental focus area with all the others. So, you have that experience. You're out there now doing that with people and making a difference in people's lives. What's your typical engagement look like? If somebody's listening to this and they go, man, we want to get more of Stephen, what would it look like?
Well, I do some coaching on a very limited basis. It's just what I choose to do. If it's the right fit, then I'll do it. I love doing keynotes, and I typically do keynotes and workshops. And so the workshop is completely customizable, whether you're talking about anywhere. And it basically, I'll take my keynote. Now I go from talking about things at a much, at a 40,000 foot level. And now I'm going to actually do some of these things for you. Like we're going to create a mission statement. We're going to unpack some of the challenges you have at your organization and talk about how we can specifically use some of the techniques. And that's typically what I do. A lot of keynotes, a lot of that. And I do some work with the Folds of Honor Foundation, which is kind of like things that that's just kind of like my passion project, is the people I like to work with. So yeah.
Awesome. Hey, how can they get a hold of your book? What's the best way? Because it's not out yet, right?
It's not out yet. We'll probably not be taking pre-orders for a couple of months after this recording, but go to my website, stephendrum.com, STEPHENDRUM.com. And that's where all the latest will be. And feel free to follow me, Stephen Drum, on Instagram or LinkedIn.
Awesome. Hey, I always like to end with two things. One is, are there certain sayings, even mantras, quotes, maybe from a mentor that you live your life by that you would like to share with this audience?
Yeah, you got me there. Because I know they're there. I just, I'm on the X here and I've got to be poised and give you something.
No. It's totally cool because, I didn't prep it. So how about a saying, what do you feel is important? Like you're going to tell this high school kid something and they're walking by and you got like 10 seconds to pass on some wisdom. What would you say?
I would say there's opportunities exist in your life every day.
Nice.
Figure out what they're going to be in advance and be deliberate and intentional with how you set the table for your success.
That's it. That's perfect. See, now you got your quote behind it. So that's good. Hey, I also want to end with just what does glad to be here mean to you?
I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. I don't have anything, more brilliant to say, but to me, it's it's gratitude. Right. And I think it's exactly like you described. I couldn't have said it better, right? It's, hey, you were selected to be here. But I'll go a step further and say, hey, selection is ongoing, right? Just like it isn't, I'm sure it's the same way in aviation, same way in special operations. Hey, you may have done some great stuff yesterday, but hey, you got to perform and step it up today as well.
That's it. That's beautiful, man. Hey, Steve or Drummy, I want to say thank you. I'll end with my glad to be here is I really enjoyed this podcast. I knew there'd be some good connections, but I really want to applaud you on taking the learnings from your experience, putting them into a book and being able to translate it in a way that makes sense for others. So good job. Keep it up. And I'll see you out there on the circuit. Maybe we'll go skiing someday in Sun Valley.
Don't threaten me with that good time. Thanks for having me on, Gucci. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks, Drummy. Glad to be here.
Glad to be here.